Um, Michał Matuszewski is a PhD candidate in the University of Warsaw, where he's working on a dissertation about Polish nature films. He is a film curator, festival programmer, and film essayist. He is also the head of the essay film studio at the VN Lab at a school in Lodz. For many years, he worked as a film curator at the Center for Contemporary Art in Warsaw. He's a grantee of the Culture and Animals Foundation and is developing a visual research-based film project on the animal gaze in film. His recent essay film project, Remembering Autopsy, was presented at the National Museum in Warsaw. So if you are ready, Michał, whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, so today I want to propose a possible way of rethinking or thinking about the cultural history of nature film through a distinction between two epistemic traditions in the context of history of natural science. It's a work in progress idea, some intuitions that I'm developing as a potential methodological framework for my dissertation on a cultural history of nature films in Poland. So I'm super open to any comments and remarks. And of course, usually I present films, fragments of films, like beautiful experimental films as well, and then I analyze them. So that would be quite new to me to go very quickly jump through the history of film. I hope it won't be too superficial. The starting point, my starting point is the assumption that wildlife cinema did not develop linearly as one stable genre, but emerged from different practices of framing nature, which differently organize the relation between the camera, animals, and the conditions of their visibility. Nature films should therefore be seen within a broader history of visual culture: zoos, menageries, natural history museums, dioramas, taxidermies, and the other forms of putting animals on public display. In this sense, what is at stake is not only the problem of animal representation, but also a certain animality of the film medium itself and its shared history with modern techniques of displaying and ordering nature. In this context, I propose to talk about two epistemic genealogies. The first one, the one that we intuitively associate with wildlife films, is based on the assumption of observing nature from a distance. It's connected with ethology, ornithology, field observation, but also with the legacy of hunting and its visual practices. The second emerges from the biological film, microcinematography, and the practice of reconstructing nature in laboratory. But it's also historically connected with the avant-garde, with the film avant-garde. What drew my attention was the significant presence of water in the second tradition, not only, of course, as the subjects of films, for example, in films about aquatic animals, but also on the level of biological and philosophical reflection. Water appears here as a necessary condition for the existence of life, and therefore of movement, and therefore of cinema. Also on the practical level, to show movement under microscope, we need some liquid environment. This is why I call this second tradition the wet tradition, clearly taking inspirations here from the humanities and hydrofeminism. Water as a material, biological, and philosophical category that runs through these films can be an important figure for understanding them. The first lineage would therefore be the dry one, based on more traditional, one might say, patriarchal ways of watching. Of course, it has to be said that those metaphors should not be applied too literally. Also, I don't want to I don't want to suggest in any way that one of them was better or worse ethically. Both traditions produce ambivalent images of nature. They mix care and curiosity with violence, knowledge with appropriation, the premise of proximity with the subordination to life, of life to specific epistemic frames. And both rely on some form, as Annette Pick has put it, the production of nature. The dry tradition is we can source the dry tradition genealogy in the development of modern ethology and ornithology. Sean Nixon, analyzing films of Julian Huxley, Niko Tinbergen, and other early ethologists, proposes the notion of an ethnological eye, a specific way of looking at animals formed at the intersection of science and practices of observing. This is not only the camera, but all social technical devices used by ethologists to bring birds closer to them, like hides, shelter, binoculars, sketches, notes, watches, illustrations, and so on. The use of the ethological eye of all of these socio-technical devices led to the fact that from the 1940s onwards, the behavioral turn takes place in the Western European wildlife photography and film. It consisted in moving away from the representation of animals as film trophies towards animal behavior as the center of attention. As a consequence, what becomes important is interaction and a social drama. Nature is organized according to the narrative rules of storytelling. The origins of the behavioral turn could be also traced to another father of modern ethology, Konrad, Lorenz. His film, as Juliane Scholz argued, are not simply a record of animal behavior, but an important tool in the constitution of ethology as new scientific discipline. In her reading, the film co-produces both a model of knowledge about behavior and Lorenz's public image, shifting the observation of animals from a classical subject-object relation towards a more relational and performative configuration of human, animal, and a camera. Scholz shows how Lorenz, by putting himself into a subject of his films, contributed to a shift from a model of objectifying distance observation towards a form of knowledge in which the researcher remains visible and interferes with the experimental situation. Tanya Munz has also pointed that Lorenz used geese as typological and individualized animals to stress his ethological findings. I think that this ambiguity is very important here. On one hand, the logic of animal typology, scientific analysis of behavior and movements, therefore framing of animals within the paradigms of natural science. And on the other hand, emotional, although anthropocentric, relation, curiosity, tenderness, and care. This logic manifests, for example, in Lorenz's public image of the father of the geese. The second pillar of the dry genealogy is what I call the hunting gaze or the venatic gaze. Greg Mitman reminds us of the fact that Tinbergen himself described bird study and bird photography as a form of sublimated hunting. Tinbergen wrote, "I know through introspection that scientific bird study and bird photography gave me exactly the kind of experiences and satisfaction as I once found in hunting seal on the Arctic ice." This show a deep connection between the ethological eye and the visual culture related with hunting, which at the beginning of photography and later in film manifested in the concept that we all know as hunting with camera. In the Polish context that I study, the most important example of this ambivalence is the work of Włodzimierz Puchalski, we might say the Polish David Attenborough or Polish Felix Rodriguez de la Fuente, who was a famous nature lover but also a hunter. Already before the Second World War, he introduced the term bloodless hunting, which perfectly reveals the basic tension of filming nature. On one hand, the camera is to replace the rifle and thus make the relation to nature more ethical, based on observation rather than killing. On the other hand, the logic of a hunt remains. It's still about tracing, patience, hiding, encounter with the animal and capturing it as an image. The camera, or rather the whole film apparatus, becomes a tool to subordinate the animal in the regime of gaze shared with the practice of hunting. This ambivalence is already visible in one of Puchalski's first post-war films, The Bird Island, but which is we might say it's like a classical early post-war nature documentary, but I see that the logic of the hunting gaze, it's already there, but 20 years later, it's openly reveals in the film that he that came out at that year in 1966, The Year of the Hunter, in which we can see that the whole narrative is based on the logic of it, on the point of view of the hunter, and we can see the literal actual scenes of hunting and killing of animals. I think that it's not a paradox, but it's a moment in which the bond between wildlife film and hunting becomes revealed. Okay, so the second genealogy, so I will. Speaking of which,
yeah, take a deep breath. You're fine. It was
I needed
coming from teams. Yeah, you're fine.
Right now. The second genealogy develops according to a different logic. It sources should be sought in microcinematography and early laboratory practices, in which film functioned not as a tool of documentation, but as a crucial part of an experimental interface of co-producing the visibility of life. The most important point of reference here is Hannah Landecker's studies on the early scientific films and their relations to film theory. She shows, analyzing the work of Jean Commandon and Alexis Carrel, that biology and film develop together. Through magnification, acceleration, and time-lapse techniques, it became possible, as she writes, to materialize time and space. I would like to add to this equation the component of water, understood both materially and as a figure of thinking. Water is a condition of life and a basic medium of observation for early microscopic films. Without water, there is neither life itself nor its visibility. Secondly, wetness has an epistemological dimension. It enables to think about the material bodies and life understood not as a set of stable forms of behavior, but as a process, flow, and relation. And an important link in this genealogy is obviously Jean Painlevé, whose films helped to develop the tradition of scientific films, but also at the same point moved it, perhaps precisely thanks to water, into the field of avant-garde. In Painlevé's films, water is not only the environment of animals, but the figure of fluidity, transformation, and the materiality of life. But at the same time, we deal with the careful reconstruction of nature, as most of the early Painlevé's films were shot in a controlled, recreated environment in aquariums. In Polish context, this genealogy is developed above all by Karol Marczak, the pioneer of scientific biological films in Poland. Marczak, already in 1950s, when he lived in Paris, he was an assistant to the pioneer of film avant-garde, Władysław Starewicz. But after returning to Poland after the Second World War, he sets up with his wife kind of a laboratory, which was also a film studio, equipped with cameras, terrariums, aquariums, and the whole infrastructure for filming the life created and maintained there. Later, the whole studio, the whole equipment was incorporated by the Educational Film Studio in Łódź, the official socialist state film production studio, responsible for producing nature films in Poland until 1990s. Films such as development of the bird embryo, the work of the heart of the sea trout embryo, or Life is Movement, do not only show biological phenomena, but they are also visually stunning. We may say avant-garde, experimental in a way. They also reveal a huge ambivalence in the wet tradition. They promise access to life itself, but to achieve that, it must be reconstructed in an aquarium, isolated, cut, closed in a preparation, and submitted to both real and epistemic violence. Okay. At this point, the work of Aleksandra Jaskulska-Marczak's students and one of the few women working at the educational film studio becomes especially important because she employs wetness not only as a laboratory technique, but as an ontology of the image. It could be seen in many of her films, such as On Water, the Plant and the Stoma, Molana from the Sun House, about the common insect whose larva lives in the water and builds its own shelters from grains of sand, and so on. Here the contemporary hydrofeminist perspective becomes useful, as it offers both an opportunity to imagine alternatives to the patriarchal order and a chance to transit the boundary of a species as a fundamental criterion of relations. This works well with the logic of Jaskulska's films, where organism, environment, and technology form a shared current. Water destabilizes rigid borders between the human and non-human, between the organism and the environment, between life and its suspension. The most interesting case here will be the tardigrades. Both the animal and Jaskulska's film from 1968 about tardigrades, these macroscopical, very small animals capable of putting themselves in the state of anabiosis, and almost complete suspension of life, and then recover actively only after contact with water. In this sense, they become the ideal figure of biological cinema. Like the film image, they are suspended between movement and stillness, between life and no life. Jaskulska's film can be therefore read not only as a biological document, but also as a reflection of film medium itself, a medium that is also kind of an anabiotic medium. Okay, so we're running out of time. So I hope that it was pretty self-explanatory. Those two intuitions that I wanted to present, how those different aesthetics and perspectives and traditions shape different epistemologies and different imaginaries of the relation between the human and not human life, and I'm open to discussion later. Thank you.